Okay, today should be a very, very, very straightforward day, okay? Should be. It's got through the word. All right, so what we're going to do today is basically go through a couple of different spreadsheets in here. You're not going to have to construct anything. You pretty much are just going to kind of be able to follow along and see some of the applications of some of the things that we have done over the course of the semester. Talk about a couple maybe new things here and there. Those of you that are in the afternoon class, most all of this nothing will be new. There'll be maybe a couple of little things here and there that will be new, but for the most part, kind of overlap. All right. So what we're going to start with is a model that is just a sort of basic mortgage model, and with a few of the little things added to it that kind of, now you've taken this course, hopefully you have a pretty good understanding of how to calculate mortgage payments and prepayment penalties and all that sort of stuff. So what this model pretty much does is it combines all of that into one very sort of straightforward model so that you can take into account prepayment penalties, you can take into account loan origination fees, you can take into account any sort of administrative fees that you might have throughout the loan, along with one other little feature, which is adding in optional extra payments, okay, that you can do each month, and ultimately see what the impact is going to be. So, with this particular model, the handout that I've given you on top of your desk is, for this particular loan, it's a $1 million loan, 5% interest rate. The loan period is 30 years. However, it is going to be prepaid at the end of 5 years. Okay, so we'll get to that here in a second. The beginning date of the loan, January 1st, 2017. And then each month, we're going to opt to basically make one extra, or $1,000 extra payment toward the principal on the loan. All right. Obviously, it calculates automatically our scheduled monthly payments. We'll kind of go through some of that here in a second. The total number of payments, but because we make that extra $1,000 a month payment, reduces us down by a few payments, really not as much as you might think. And then obviously the total interest. But it's also sort of interesting to note up here, in this particular case, 44% goes toward interest, 56% toward principal. Now if we take out that $1,000, just to sort of get rid of that for a second since we've done really nothing with that, look at how that changes things a little bit. Obviously the total interest goes way up because we're, and the actual number of payments, only changes by about 4 months, but the big difference is we reduce our interest expense dramatically by making those extra monthly payments of $1,000. And if you look at the relationship here between interest and principal, obviously the interest expense goes down. Okay, now, those of you that are in the afternoon class, you have seen all of this for the most part before, but one little thing that's sort of different here is that with this model, we have sort of named our variables and in essence kind of does a few other cute little things, but in essence, what it's doing is it's using the payment function and then taking the interest rate, whatever that is, dividing it by 12, taking the number of years in the loan, multiplying it by 12, and then the loan amount, and then calculating the monthly payment based on that. Okay. Now over here on the right-hand side of the model are sort of the little add-ins to this that we added a year or two ago. And this is where we can have loan origination fees as a percent of the overall loan amount. Monthly servicing fees or administrative fees of, in this case, $500 per month. Prepayment fees, 8% of the outstanding mortgage balance if the loan is paid off early. And in this case, we're saying that the loan is prepaid at the end of 5 years or 60 months. And then the one piece that's actually we're solving for here is the effective cost of borrowing or the lender's yield. Okay, now where that comes from, just to kind of show you from kind of the cash flow perspective, and put that $1,000 back in here just so that your handout matches up with what I'm doing up here, right? So if you take a look each month, and if you look over here, we've got, in addition to what you're familiar with in terms of an amortization schedule, we've got obviously the payment number, the payment date, you've got your beginning balance, scheduled payment, and then we have the inserted extra payment here. So for the total payment, obviously the difference of $1,000 there. And then the principal payment, obviously, is going to be the portion that is applied to the loan balance, and the interest portion, specifically the 5% on a monthly basis, to give us our ending balance. So none of that's really new except for the insertion of this extra payment. Now, what is sort of new is to come over here, and we've created an interest rate column. And the way that this interest rate column is set up, in essence, you can go in, change any of those, and you can have a monthly interest rate attributed to each individual payment. So in other words, if you had a variable rate mortgage or adjustable rate mortgage, you can go in and sort of say, okay, from month to month, change that interest rate, and then ultimately your payment will be changed accordingly, okay? Now, from the lender's perspective on all of this, their cash flows are going to be based upon obviously what the loan amount was, and then subtracting out any loan origination fees. Okay, so if the loan amount were $1 million and the origination fees, I believe, were what, 2%. Okay, so 2% of $1 million is going to be what? $20,000. Okay, so 1 million minus 2% or $20,000 is going to give the total amount that the lender is going to front at the beginning of the loan. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Okay, we've done this in class in terms of doing those sort of calculations. Now, subsequent to that, then each month, the lender is going to receive your monthly loan payment, which includes the normal loan payment or the scheduled payment, plus then the extra payment, okay? And then that obviously is going to affect the total dollar amount that they're going to receive month after month after month, okay? Everybody clear on that? Now, what you're going to see, if you look at the handout or at the spreadsheet itself, you go down to month 60 or payment 60, all right, what you see occurring, a couple of things. One, as far as the lender's cash flow is concerned, you get this huge influx of cash that occurs here at the end of that 60 months, okay? Anybody want to take a hazarded guess as to what that's going to include? So, it's going to include, I'm sorry? It's going to include the prepayment penalty. It's also going to include the payoff of the loan balance. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? So those two things combined at the end of that 60th month. All right? So what that's doing is, in essence, taking that whole series of cash flows that occurs over that 60 months, from that beginning point to the end of the 60th month, and then we're over here in this final column, we're calculating an effective cost of borrowing. Now, here's the thing to sort of point out here. The only number in this entire stream of numbers that is even remotely relevant to us is the one where the loan is being paid off. All of the other calculations are done are just there to basically, because you've got to calculate the internal rate of return, but what's going to happen is if we go up and we change, let's say that the payoff period from 60 months to, let's say, 65. Okay? Well, you see what happens is now all of a sudden the payoff jumps forward 5 months, so now that is going to be the relevant number. Okay? Now, all Excel is doing, if you look up here, is it's using this index function, which this, you know, once again, in the modeling class we talked about this, but all this is doing is it's basically saying, look down in this column of data to the 60th month, okay, and then give me that number. That's all that function is doing, all right, because it knows in the 60th, or in this case, 65th month, that that's when the prepayment's occurring, okay? Everybody make sense? Or everybody cool with that? All right. So this is pretty straightforward. Now, any questions on this one?
So no matter what you enter it, prepayment occurs at, it's going to automatically go to that.
Correct. So if we were to just, I mean, you can do it on yours right there in front of you, but you know, if you even enter, like we prepay this at the end of month 1, okay? So now here at the end of month 1, it shows as a result of paying off that quick, you've got a really high interest rate. Well, the reason for that is because you just paid $20,000 of loan origination fees for the privilege of borrowing for 1 month. That's ridiculous.
How's someone to do that?
Well, you probably wouldn't, okay? But, I mean, take a look. You got 2 things going on there. Let's just leave it at that 1 month here for a second. First of all, we get rid of the loan origination fees. That's going to change it considerably. But then you're also going to have the prepayment penalty of the 8%. Well, if we get rid of that, okay, now it's down to 5.6, and that's only because of the monthly servicing fees. So we get rid of that. Well, now it's just down to 5%. The original. So the point of sort of seeing that by paying off that loan that first month, you've got the most extreme effect of having those loan origination fees, the monthly servicing fees, and the prepayment penalty fees, all affecting what that effective cost of borrowing would be if you only held that loan for 1 month. Okay? Now, that is a lender's dream. You know, I mean, if you really think about it, from the standpoint that they could cash in that much, that quickly, and you get in and out of that deal, you know, because they're going to make a ton of fees off of that. Okay? All right, other questions? Good question, Ted. Yep.
So you can pay it off anytime between the loan period is 1 to 30 years. So
Correct.
you can pay it off anytime between that 30 year period.
That is correct. So we could, let's just say, we could do month 360 as the prepayment, which is not a prepayment. I mean, that's just paying it off whenever it's due. We go up here, put back in our loan origination fees, in this case of 2%, monthly servicing of $500, and the prepayment penalty of 8%. So we shouldn't have much of a prepayment because there's no balance. But we can see that as a result of that, our effective cost of borrowing actually is lower than it is on the handout. And part of the reason for that is because the prepayment penalty, okay, is not existent, I guess.
Right.
Okay. Make sense? Okay. Anybody else? Well, that's too easy. Okay. No other questions?
I have an observation.
Yep.
So if you did want this, you couldn't put it on that.
No, it isn't. It is. That's what this is right here. This is an adjustable rate. You can change that rate every single month if you want to.
Okay, but it's you do it manually,
Yep.
like what we did with waterfall.
Well, this one I can't remember whether I just hard coded some things or not. Let me just look here. Yeah, it looks like it's just pulling from the interest rate above, but that would be easy enough to fix. You could just simply do equal, hit the cell above it, and then copy down.
will it still calculate into the effective cost of borrowing?
Yes.
So this is like when we do like a 5-year deal with a 30-year amortization
Yep.
on our calculator.
Exactly.
And then it just spits everything out nicely on the end.
Right. So it's a heck of a lot quicker to do it this way. But here's the thing. I mean, you know, and I know so like just as sort of as an example of having just done what I did in terms of fixing that. So now, if I hit 7%, then everything from that point forward will sort of carry through. Okay, but the question, which I think is a great question, Woody, I mean, or a statement, that can you imagine, I mean, I know you would say, oh, it'd be so much easier, but can you imagine if this is all we did, you know, in this course, was to take basically and just plug in the numbers and you're done without having gone through the brain damage you had to go through to get to that point? I mean, because, you know, hopefully you have a much better appreciation and understanding of where those numbers are coming from, and ultimately, you know, how they're being used in this and how they can potentially influence, you know, everything, okay? All right? And in the quote-unquote good old days, whenever I had to go through this in school, we had to do everything by hand, okay? So it was 10 times worse, lots and lots of formulas. So this is...
Professor, what is the impact of making that $1,000 payment on the duration of the loan?
Well, not very much. I mean, as you can see, that it basically, if you change it to 0, only decreases it by 4 months, but what it does do is it reduces your interest payments. Okay. Let's move forward to another model. Okay, so once again, those of you that are in the afternoon class, you've seen pretty much the same sort of model, the construction loan schedule model. So, what question? Oh. So with construction loans, basically they're set up much like credit cards. And so you have a line of credit that you have been given by a lender, and based upon what your pre-construction costs are going to be for the project, and the lender then says, okay, we're going to give you that line of credit, and then sort of this case, for this particular property, you've basically been given, it looks like, sort of a line of credit of about, $2.5 million. Total project costs are about $3 million, but part of that is obviously your land costs, so about $2.5 million roughly as sort of a line of credit from the lender. But the way construction loans work is they don't give you basically all that money up front, okay? It is simply you've got a line of credit, you access that line of credit when you need it and no sooner than whenever you need it. Because you may say, okay, well, I've got a bunch of expenses coming up and I want to get that money as quickly as possible and then pay my subcontractors as quickly as possible. While that sounds great, not necessarily the best strategy. Usually the best strategy is to try to delay accessing your capital from the lender as long as possible, because the moment you get the money, that's the moment you start paying interest on it, okay? And it's also why, and I don't think it's in practice, it's a great thing, that a lot of developers do try to delay their payments to their subcontractors, because they sort of are saying, the moment we pay that subcontractor, then once again, that interest clock starts ticking on that money that we paid them. But at the same time, your subcontractors, they've got to eat, they've got to pay bills, they've got to exist. And so it begins to be this kind of interesting relationship of, some subcontractors may say, we don't want to work with this particular developer because they're known to be really late about making their payments to us, whereas this other developer, the moment that we do the work, the moment we invoice them, we get paid. And so there's definitely some goodwill that I think people have to kind of consider whenever it comes into paying subcontractors out of your draws. Anything you want to add to that, Woody? I mean,
Well, everybody loves Habitat because we pay it quickly. We don't draw because we have all the cash, and our vendors love us. And so when we want something done, but I know what you're talking about because they put us at the top, and all the people that don't pay them on time, they're like, Woody, I don't care about those guys. We're going to work for you guys quickly.
no, because I mean, it's just common sense. You know, if you've got plumbers, you've got, you know, framers, you know, whoever, and then you're, you know, sitting on their invoice for 60 days or whatever it may be before you actually front them the cash, not necessarily a good thing for them. Okay. All right. Yep.
Is the reason, like from a lender's perspective, is the reason they just leave it as a like line of credit, is that because there's not, you know, it's still a piece of dirt in process, it's not an asset that they have like a lien on?
Well, you have a lien on the property and a lien on any improvements that are being made to the property, but the point being is the line of credit, I mean, it's the only way to realistically try to say, well, that's what the current value of the asset is, but also, you know, I mean, because the lender wants also a direct connection between the work that has been done on the site and the amount of money that they have fronted you in the draw. In other words, that's another reason why they're not going to just give you that money, you know, outright. That, okay, yeah, okay, here's $2 million. All right, go forth, build thy project, and, you know, come back in 12 months and we'll settle up, you know, whatever. Not going to happen as a general rule. Okay. All right. Now, also what you should take note of, once again, those of you that are not in the afternoon class, is that, you know, each month within this construction process, the dollar amount of the draws of the project cost differ, okay? Because just simply as a matter of practice, whenever you're doing construction work, you know, it's not just a simple fixed amount that you're paying each and every month to basically do the work on the project. You know, you're going to have, you know, you start out, let's say with a raw piece of dirt, you've got site work that you've got to do, then you've got to put in, you know, some basic infrastructure to the property in terms of sewer lines, water lines, probably if you've got underground utilities in terms of electricity. Then you're going to, you know, go in, pour a slab. Then you're going to come in, you know, have framing done. Then you're going to come in and you know, begin to have you know, the roof put up, you know, and so forth, so on. You're going to have plumbers come in. You're going to have all these other different tradespeople come in, talking about just, you know, housing. And, you know, each month, it's a different person probably coming in and doing work. So that just simply, obviously that dollar amount is going to change from one month to the next. And you're going to have some months that are obviously much heavier than others in terms of cost. Okay. All right. Questions? Yep.
Do lenders use that as like a form of risk management?
Yes.
So, let's say, can they cut it off at any point? Or is that going to be via the covenants and restrictions of the document?
Well, okay, when you say cut it off, and under what circumstances?
Well, that's, so.
They can cut it off. I mean, if you've done something you weren't supposed to do, I mean, whatever that might be.
Breach.
Yeah, some sort of breach. You know, it could also be that maybe some radical, crazy, you know, market phenomenon has happened, and the lender is just saying, maybe 3 months into this, but we're going to pull the plug on the remainder of your construction financing because market conditions have changed so much that moving forward with this project just doesn't make economic sense. And you're saying, are you serious? You know, and even on a large scale. I mean, I remember very vividly in the 1980s, whenever we had probably the biggest real estate crash that I've ever personally seen. And you had, I remember in downtown Dallas, you had an office building where they had built the entire underground parking garage for the office building, okay? And then all of a sudden, stop. And so for years, that underground parking garage just sat there, you know, with the building supposed to be built on top of it, you know, and you had, you know, all sorts of things sticking out of this, you know, underground, you know, parking garage, and it was the most bizarre, you know, thing to kind of witness. You're just like, how in the world, or why in the world would they? But They were just sort of like, okay, our sunk cost, literally, of, you know, putting this, you know, parking garage into the ground, we wanted to stop there because we didn't want to incur the additional risk of building an office building that probably is going to sit empty, which was smart at that time because you did have so many office buildings, you know, shopping centers and whatever sit empty for months and years. Okay? All right?
We went down to see the Brightline train, some of us. There was a gigantic structure. You remember, were you there? That was just like the first 2 floors, and it was axed about in '06, and it never got rebuilt. They're still fighting over it, but it looks like did you go? Yeah, it just looked like a big mess.
Yeah, something out of a apocalyptic
Just
movie.
stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Other questions, comments? Yep, Chris.
In that sense, like the parking example, doesn't it make sense to just try to finish that and parking?
Well, yeah, if there was a demand for it. In this particular case, it happened to be far enough away from other things that really wasn't viable, and, you know, but yeah, I mean, if there's still market viability for it, then sure. But I mean,
Just like losing the whole thing.
yeah, I mean, but to your point, while it's uncommon, it does happen in terms of losing your construction financing. But, you know, other times it may be, you know, just simply the malfeasance that, you know, you haven't done the work that you were supposed to do. You did subpar quality work on the work that you did do. And so the lender sort of cuts off. Because normally what's going to happen is the lender is going to send out on a fairly regular basis, you know, depending on how large scale the property is, you know, an inspector once a week, once a month, you know, to kind of take a look at things and to see what has been done, what progress has been made, and so forth, so on. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, so let's say if there was like a market crash again, because we've been talking about how
Right.
that's a risk, would that happen a lot more often during that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So then that's probably a standard escape clause in the way that the loan works.
Well, yeah, for the lender,
Yeah.
in the sense that, yeah, if there's a dramatic change in market conditions, but they, you know, because usually what they'll say is, well, at that point, we want more money from you, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Developer, you know, give us more money and we will allow you to sort of continue and we will continue to fund because they're gonna want more equity under those circumstances. Right. Okay. Yep.
Under principal reduction, so you input those manually, like I know for months 0 to 11.
Yep.
But why is that month 12, it equals the loan balance at month 12? So what is?
So you're saying, okay.
Because, yeah, you have to manually.
Oh, okay. Well, because at that point, you're not gonna be making any more principal reductions. That's gonna be your final payment.
Oh, okay.
Interest only.
So,
Yep. So in other words, this represents the lump sum payment that you're gonna be making to the lender at the conclusion of this 12-month loan.
Buyout.
Both principal and interest. The principal portion, you know, in this case, is the 2360, okay? The interest portion, 147,000. But those two added together give us the total principal reduction.
okay,
Or in this case, the total payment, I'm sorry.
okay.
The payoff, principal and interest actually. Okay, does that make sense, everybody?
So that is the takeout.
Well, that's the total amount. In other words, the total takeouts are $2,360,000. The total interest on the construction loan is $147,000. Add those two together, you're going to get the $2,507,915.
As a matter of practice, would the takeout loan typically be for the full balance or the?
Yes.
Okay.
So normally what's going to happen at this point, you're going to have an agreement with a permanent lender. And many times your construction lender is not going to be the same lender as your permanent lender. So the construction lender may be a local bank, but your permanent lender might be some sort of large-scale institutional sort of investor or bank or pension fund or insurance company or somebody else that's gonna front the long-term, traditional mortgage on the property. Yep.
At what point do you try to work that out with the permanent lender?
As soon as possible. I mean, there's no other, I mean, ideally, you're gonna work it out before you even start the project, okay? It's just that the permanent lender doesn't want to be the construction lender. Because the permanent lender has certain skill sets that are just simply,
You don't handle the constant cash flow.
well, yeah, well, they also don't wanna have to deal with the inspections piece and all of that, so the permanent lender wants to sit back and collect checks,
'Cause I think
okay?
If you don't have it before that, I mean, will they give you an interest rate a year in advance? Well, this is gonna be your interest rate?
Probably not, they'll probably lock it in at some point, you know, during the construction period. But once again, it'll be predicated on whatever the prevailing rates are, plus a certain percentage, you know, whatever their margin might be above and beyond LIBOR or some other sort of base rate.
So if your performance shows that you're gonna get a permanent loan for 5%, and then they see double to, or extra time to.
Yeah, and then that's also another thing, that even though you got that commitment from the permanent lender, it's contingent on a bunch of stuff, okay? It may be contingent on you finishing the project by a certain date, or having the occupancy by a certain date, or having the certificate of occupancy by a certain date, or having a certain level of number of tenants or occupancy within the property. In other words, you must achieve 70% occupancy before we will give you the permanent loan. So you could have a situation, which is somewhat common, that you finish all the construction, you get the certificate of occupancy, you've leased up the property, but maybe you've only got it to 50% occupancy, and the permanent lender is saying, we need 75% occupancy. So you're sitting there in this weird, you know, zone of the construction lender is still you're still on the hook to the construction lender, and you've got usually a higher interest rate with the construction lender, so you're paying them considerably more interest to continue having that money outstanding with them before you get the takeout commitment from the permanent lender.
Also late fees because you.
Well, it's not necessarily going to be late fees, it's going to be accumulated interest. Which you can sort of say, it's saying, you know.
So I noticed that you don't make any payments until month 12 with this?
Okay, yes, and it's quite common with construction loans that the idea behind it is, it's a line of credit, and we know, as a lender, that you don't really have any cash flow coming in off of this thing, okay? That for whatever reasons, you know, I mean, because you don't have it finished, so you can't really have it occupied. Now, let's say that it was a phased project, you had like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, then you could very well have, you finish phase 1, but you still have the construction loan for all 3 phases, that you could start making some payments if that one gets occupied. But, like I was saying earlier, the other reason why you would be making principal payments would be if the lender says, whoa, wait now, market conditions have changed, since you got this loan, we want a capital infusion in this because we don't want to be left dry, you know, without, you know, being paid off. So you might come in at month 6 and the lender says, okay, give us $500,000. And in that case, well, obviously that's going to lower the amount that you have, well, in essence, that was the exact amount that you had drawn at the beginning of that month, but what it basically is doing is just pretty much keeping it pays down, obviously, the balance of the loan, and also is going to reduce your overall interest expense. Okay? Yep.
So, if a question was asked, the project cost $100,000 in the end of month 1, you're going to put that in month 1.
Right.
Okay, my next question is that if you made a payment of $500,000, wouldn't you save on interest if you just didn't draw the $500,000?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, in other words, if you could, just to show, there's one, we'll get rid of this for a second, back to this being 0. All right, so you see that our overall is 2507,915. So let's just say that we do, if I'm understanding what you're saying, let's just say that we delay our draw for this month of the 500,000 to this month. So that means instead of drawing 600,000 here, we're going to draw 1.1 million. Okay, let's see how much impact it may have on our interest. It's probably not going to be a huge, but it's going to be significant. All right. So it's 147 now. So we save about $5,000 of interest by shifting it just 30 days. Or that portion, 30 days. Okay? Put that back to where it was.
So it makes sense that we draw as less often than we can.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying earlier. I mean, in a perfect situation, you would try to push all of these forward in terms of the draws, but you have bills to pay. You've got to pay your contractors. You've got to pay for your materials. You've got to, do all of that. You may save a few $1,000s here in interest cost, but is that worth the difficulties and the challenges that you're going to thrust upon your suppliers and your subcontractors? Okay.
You kind of spoke to conventional lenders not having expertise in this type of thing, having different lenders who have the inspection knowledge. Do you ever see the case of real estate construction companies in-house financing? Because
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're a large enough firm and you've got the capital, there's not a requirement that you go out and get a construction loan. And it's going to be a heck of a lot easier on you if you don't. Because you're not really having to worry about all of these sort of interim, details of providing, that construction lender with everything. If you're financing it internally, then you're just able to just sort of pay out of pocket whenever you need to ultimately get the project built, and then at the end of that, then you would then go to a permanent lender, assuming you want to get it permanently financed. Because it may very well be that, once again, you don't even need to permanently finance it. You just simply say, okay, we want to own it free and clear. We don't want to have a loan on it. We paid for all the construction cost up front. Now we're occupying it and moving on.
More what I was saying is someone who's contracted to build. Do you see them financing, to drive?
It could. I mean, if you have a large enough construction company, then it could very well be that they will provide their own financing.
That's more what I was also, more than just doing equity.
Right.
In the beginning, just paying for the whole construction.
Yeah.
Could you call column E interest reserves? Is that the same?
Probably. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Now, down here at the bottom of this, got a couple of other little calculations. All right. So here, the other inputs that you can kind of fool around with, you've got the gross building area, the square footage of the building there, and then you've also got, you can put in your land acquisition cost and then an expected cap rate for resale. So, in this circumstance, we've said, okay, this is a 10,000 square foot building. And so based upon this being a 10,000 square foot building, all you're really saying is, well, what is my construction cost per square foot? So all you're really doing is taking that total construction cost of the 2507, 915.79, dividing by 10,000 to give you that $250.79 of construction cost. So now, this is one of the things I think it's worth pointing out, that number represents your construction cost, not including your land cost. Because in most instances, whenever you are trying to put together a project, you're going to want to separate those two, okay? Because your land cost could be dramatically a larger percentage of this overall project cost, and all you're really trying to get a handle on is, what's my construction loan going to be? Because in most instances, the construction lender is using your land as collateral. In other words, under many circumstances, when you go in to get that construction loan, you're saying to that construction lender, take the land as the collateral, I own the land free and clear, or my business partner owns the land free and clear, and there's not usually another loan on the land, okay? There can be, but in most instances, you don't want to have another loan on the land, so that can very easily be used as the collateral for the construction loan, okay? Questions, comments, observations on any of that? Okay, so taking the construction loan, adding in whatever your land costs are to get the overall project cost of the $3 million. And then in this case, if we were to apply a cap rate to that of 8%, then that would mean that we would need to get a required net operating income of $240,000 per year in order to meet the base level requirements of this deal. So then you can kind of begin to pop that number back in your pro forma and sort of see whether or not, you know, it makes any sense. Yeah.
You said you have any questions, I didn't chime in, but I kind of do. So you said you don't own either one of these things, the construction that you're going to do and the land you just bought.
Well, the land, more than likely, you own free and clear.
Okay.
Normally.
Cash in the...
Normally.
Okay.
Because the construction lender wants to have something that they can basically walk away with in the event of this half-finished project or whatever that may take place. Okay. I mean, there may be some wiggle room in there, but for the most part, you know, the lender wants that as some sort of security in the event that something goes sour.
And so you couldn't use like other things that you own as...
You could, yeah. You could. But most of the time, the cleaner situation is to simply contribute the land as the collateral. Okay? Now, one circumstance where you would not be able to contribute the land as collateral would be where basically you're building on a long-term ground lease.
Okay.
Like, for example, we gave, you know, some examples, I think, you know, previously when we talked a little bit about ground leases, that, like, for example, if you wanted to build a dorm, let's say on this campus, the university, instead of selling you the land, they might say, okay, we're going to give you a 30-year ground lease. You come in, you build your dorm, and then you collect whatever revenues you can from that dorm, and at the end of 30 years, you basically turn the dorm over to us, kind of thing. But the lender is going to say,
yeah, no collateral.
There's no collateral there, and so they're going to put a lien on the actual structure itself, but they're probably going to want some additional sort of collateral because they don't really have anything they can attach other than the structure itself. Right. Okay. Good questions. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yep.
Like you, once you finish in month 12, how do you get? Where do you get that money from? Like that's when you get another loan to pay the.
Right. So once again, what happens here is sometime toward the end of all of this, you already have a prearranged takeout commitment from a permanent lender.
Oh, yeah, that's what you said.
Okay, and so that permanent lender then will step in, will write a check for the $2,507,000 to the construction lender, and then now you're going to be making monthly payments to this permanent lender.
And it's like you negotiate with them like an approximate amount. Like
Right.
you never know exactly
Right.
the final amount until you finish, right?
Right. But usually there's going to be a maximum, there's going to be other stipulations as to what is required in terms of the feasibility of the project and that sort of thing. And what you may find is that that takeout commitment that you get from that lender, this is actually another point that we haven't talked about, is that loan may not be the best loan you could get, okay? It may very well be that they were taking on some risk of you finishing the project and you doing this and doing that and getting it occupied, but it may very well be that that permanent loan, once you've got it and you get the property up and running for a few years, that it makes sense to refinance that loan and to get a better loan with a better deal, okay? And maybe you can pull out some equity, okay? All right, Other questions before we move on? All right, another little model. This is also in the handout. So this is another just simple little before tax cash flow model. And where you're given some basic information about the property in terms of its performance in terms of rental rates, vacancy rates, that sort of thing. You pop in those pieces of information along with growth rates for your income, your vacancy and collection losses, your other income, and total operating expenses. So in this scenario, we can go in, and this is just a nice, simple model. Okay, that's all it is. It's just a nice, simple model, nothing complex, but just so that you can kind of begin to wrap your head around a project, whether it makes any sense whatsoever, of putting in these very basic pieces of information. So you're very easy able to go in and say, well, play what if, and kind of say, well, what if we lowered the rental rate to $8 a square foot? How is that going to affect the project viability? Lower it to $7. How low could we go? Because what happens, even though we go to a really low rental rate per square foot, you're seeing the project is potentially still viable. Well, part of the reason why it's still viable, we've also got this other income, which is going to obviously juice things a little bit, but we're also keeping constant the debt service coverage ratio at 1.2. So in other words, your loan is actually going down significantly as we obviously are adjusting whatever the rental rate is, okay? So let's just get rid of, let's put that as 1. And then operating expenses, and get rid of those. And vacancy. All right. So just getting rid of pretty much everything, in this first year, just to kind of show the flow-through effects. All right. So if we start off with $1 per square foot on a 10,000 square foot building, then $10,000 of income. We have no vacancies and collection losses. We have no other income. So that means our effective gross income is still $10,000. We have no operating expenses, so we're still at $10,000. And then we're also saying that our NOI is $10,000 with a 1 as our debt service coverage ratio. And that simply means that lender is willing to give us a loan where the mortgage payments are equal to the net operating income. It would never do that, but the point being is that would simply mean that your before tax cash flow would be 0. Okay? Now you're sort of looking at these future years. This is kind of an interesting thing to be able to sort of do, is simply because of the growth factor that we put in there for potential gross income. You're basically seeing that flow through all the way to the bottom line, and all that you really have left over for the before tax cash flow is the amount attributed to that growth rate. Does that make sense? So if we change that growth rate, then everything just stays constant all the way through. Okay? All right. So it's kind of, I'll explain a couple of other little quick little things here. What was the original amount? $10? Yeah. Okay, and our vacancy rate was also 10%, and other income was up $1,000 a month. And then operating expenses were 30? 20. 25. Okay. And then 1.2?
Yes.
So, one of the other things that we built into this model, as we said, are the growth rates. So that you can go and you can look at each individual year. We'll start up here just with the first one, just to show what we're doing mathematically. Is we're simply taking the $100,000 for the first year of income, multiplying it by 1 plus the growth rate of 1%. So we're basically multiplying 100,000 times 1.01, and that's going to give us the 101,000. Okay, and then each subsequent year, we're just taking the previous year and I'm doing the same thing. Okay, so obviously sequentially and incrementally, you're going to get interest in one sense, or growth on top of the growth. Okay.
How do you decide what your, growth rate would be? How would you measure that?
Excellent question. Hard to answer. Those of you that have taken like the market analysis class, my suspicion is you've talked a little bit in that class about, trying to forecast what, rents might be and what vacancies might be, and then also looking at what they have been, in the past. The problem is, it's all a prognostication, okay? And, you ask me, and I don't consider myself to be a pessimist, I consider myself to be sort of a realist. I'm saying, all right, like right now in this market, interest rates are going up. Anytime interest rates go up, it is bad for real estate, okay? And so immediately, what's going through my head is, okay, if interest rates are going up, in order for me to maintain my yields on my properties, then I've got to raise my rents. Now the question is whether the market can bear that increase in my rents to satisfy my internal required yield. So the point is, I can go ahead and try to forecast what I might be able to get, but barring that, the other way that you can sort of lock it in is to just simply say up front, this is your lease rate to your tenant. And you've got a 5-year lease with them, and you're going to stair step the lease up by 1% a year. Okay? This is why you typically like that sort of approach with a property. But then the thing is, you can hard code those stair steps, but they can also be tied to some sort of an index. And that makes it, really unpredictable as to what those cash flows might be from one year to the next, because what happens if the market all of a sudden tanks? Well, then you could be left with lower rental income, which could impact your ability to be able to pay your loan amount or your debt service.
That index could be connected to the prevailing rate or something.
It can be connected to almost anything that you and the lender sort of agree to. But usually it's going to be, some sort of established standard, governmentally issued kind of rate, whether it's a consumer price index, whether it's a federal funds rate or something else. Okay? All right, good question. Now the ones that beyond the income, you think about vacancies and collection losses, same sort of thing is true there. If from a market analysis perspective, you should be saying, okay, is there a whole lot of new product that's about to come on the market right now with a particular product type in a particular area? I mean, take for example, here, within the Fort Lauderdale area, like close to Flagler Village or that general area. I mean, what's happening there? An explosion of high-rise, mid-rise, sort of upper-end luxury-ish apartments, all of which are competing basically against each other, and all kind of going online within a couple of years of each other. So at some point, whenever everything comes online, one has to sort of step back and say, is there really that much demand for all of those units there? And if there isn't, then you're going to see obviously a reduction in rental rates and to try to make sure that their occupancy levels stay at a certain sustained level. But that's the sort of area that scares me to death in the sense that if I were a developer and owner of one of those properties, because with all of that stuff hitting on the market, I mean, I would be saying right now, sell it. Sell it, sell it, sell it, sell it, sell it. Let somebody else have to deal with that problem, because there's a very good chance you're going to be left in a situation where you're going to have a glut of space available. Now, if the market dynamics bear out the product that's being supplied there, you know, in the sense that it's very clear there's a high demand of people wanting to live there with high enough incomes to support those kind of projects, and you can just keep building it and building it and building it, and more people will come and occupy those spaces. There's nothing wrong with that. But those sort of dynamics have to be there to allow that to happen. And anybody that's familiar with that particular area, I mean, in one sense, you could say, okay, well, yeah, you can appeal to people living downtown or working downtown and you know, that sort of thing. But there's only a handful of like walkable kinds of things within that area. If you live in some of those places, I mean, there's a couple of things, you know, over on US 1 or whatever, but it's, I mean, in the heart of like the village, you know, it's like, okay, a couple of brew pubs or whatever, but you know, in terms of like a core of restaurants and other sort of activities, just not a whole lot, you know. And so you have to really say, with that density of all those people there, you know, why do we not already have, you know, these other, you know, things that would be appealing to those folks? So I don't know, that's a, you know, just an example of, you know, taking, you know, a strong look at what your vacancies and collection losses might be. You know, if you've got a lot of new product coming online that's virtually identical with your product, then you've got to, you know, be serious about how much that can fluctuate. Okay? And then operating expenses, you know, that's also sort of a tricky one too, because there you've got things like property taxes. You know, while there may be governmental limits as to the increases that they may be able to, you know, pop onto you as a property owner, you know, that is one that can just go through the roof over a number of years that you're just not expecting the value, you know, to go up that much, and therefore your underlying property taxes to go up by that much. And so, you know, it can make the project, you know, much less viable or certainly much less profitable than it would be, you know, otherwise. Not to mention, what about flood insurance? You know, that's a whole, you know, other one that, you know, once again, you'd only expect that number to probably escalate that much more. So,
and
you know,
perhaps changing.
yeah, so to me, you know, the long-term hold of, you know, some of these sort of properties, you have to really question, you know, whether they're as viable as you might think they are once you start factoring in all of those other issues. You know, they look great, you know, as the initial pro forma. If we can get $2.50 a square foot per rent per month, you know, that looks like a heck of a deal. But then all of a sudden, all the other factors come into play that you've got, you know, expenses going way up, you've got vacancies, you know, escalating, you know, then your bottom line just drops out and the project is maybe no longer even viable.
Is there any like ethical issue if you're like, you've got all this, you know, forecasted, figure out, understood, and you're like, hey, look, kind of like where you're like, hey, look, we're gonna just go ahead and sell, you know, because my father bought a business. The guy who previously owned the business saw a decrease in the business happening, didn't tell him about it, and then he bought it and the business died. You know,
It's buyer beware.
buyer beware.
You know, as long as you're not, I'm trying to think of the right way to express this, but in my opinion, it is a buyer beware situation. Everyone is entitled to do their due diligence. You don't lie to someone. In other words, if they ask you point blank, what are the, you know, rental rates, what are the, you know, you don't fudge any of the numbers.
Right.
But it is sort of a fine line because you don't necessarily want to disclose every single thing that
And it
you
is a forecast at the
know
end
about
of the day.
the forecasting of the value of that property.
Right.
And that's simply a risk that the purchaser has to take on and in terms of their due diligence. Pure and simple.
There's a difference in lying and not telling the whole truth.
Or not simply disclosing every detail, you know.
It's a very
So, but no, it's a good question. I mean, it's a fair question. You know, somebody once told me that ethics kind of boils down to this, that with whatever you do and whatever you've done, if you can feel comfortable seeing that on the front page of the newspaper the next day, then it's okay.
The
You know,
newspaper
but
does.
you know, it's sort of like if you really are gonna cringe at, you know, whatever you've done or, you know, that sort of thing, then you've got to sort of say, well, maybe I need to step back and maybe not do that.
You're gonna sleep at night.
Yeah, or you can sleep at night. But just because you're doing the right thing and that's what doesn't mean you're gonna sleep at night. One of my absolute best friends that is an amazing real estate investor back in Texas, this guy never sleeps. I mean, he has to take Ambien every single day, you know, because it's just, because so many things being processed up there in his head daily. You know, okay, tomorrow gotta go deal with that air conditioner, you know, I've gotta go deal with the city government, I've gotta go deal with the banker, I've gotta go deal with this new prospective tenant, I've gotta go, you know, all that stuff constantly, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, you know, all of a sudden floating around, you know, oh, I deal with the IRS, I've gotta, you know, it's just endless. And so the guy can never sleep. And it's just like, I can you know, understand that, you know, because that's unfortunately part of being a property owner or developer and having to constantly deal with all of those stresses that, you know, exist. But, you know, still you can exacerbate it by doing really bad things, and then potentially you really can never sleep. So, okay, moving on. All right. Any other sort of questions about this? Fairly straightforward. Okay, good. All righty. All right, so believe it or not, that gets us through quiz number 8. Okay? So now what we're going to do is basically the last chapter, which will deal with quiz number 9. So go ahead and let's take a 5-minute break.
Wouldn't bother them at all. My eggs weren't at all. They slept fine. The bacon caps were big, and they didn't give a crap.
Hey, work right there. Hey, oh my God.
You do pay the ball.
You got me with the one?
Basically,
I was over at
the end of the month, so therefore, the first thing is the following. No, because correct.
You got it at the end. You got it at the end.
End of the month, right here. End of the month.
Oh, you get it also at the end of the month.
Yes. Yes.
Back here. What do you include? What you
Because that's the total payoff of everything.
I don't want to. At the end, this is what you want to pick
Right,
up.
yes.
So like hackers.
Had you added on there?
Yeah, my mom bought this for me at Five Below. Or use a sticker. Like, if you get hacked, people can access your camera and look at you. To avoid that.
helpful, but.
But yeah, my light comes on still. It's never like, yeah, my whole light. Yeah, this is last
Oh, it's super, super. Cameras on, yeah.
Hey, I don't have
Everyone's gonna just want my news.
Ready for the cruise?
Yeah.
For the week. Oh, you started working on the long with right now or not? So for the cruise.
Not bad. Oh yeah.
The other process is just in that one project. Talk about what project. No. I thought you would show up.
I've been trying to go for the past 4 years. And
Yeah, I
for
usually
years,
try.
that's what my fight is.
Well, I don't think it will.
No, I'm saying like every year.
Well, yeah, but it could be.
I did this.
Yeah, I mean, how much are you gonna upgrade?
The very first day.
Well, if we got 3, I don't know if there's 3 rooms.
So I'm like, okay.
Or there may be 4. Should we ask? But maybe we could do for the group. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe we get there. See how much it is and what we can
I won by like 2 and 1 to go. And then 10 plus 6. And 10 plus 2. Everything is just right back.
only during the day when you're going on like a couple times.
I went down in the on the 18th
Like on the ship or?
No, like, everything here on the ship.
I lose a hand, or I didn't got enough money. Didn't got enough money. I was I want to buy like seeing him on real live, and being like the limit or I wanted to help him with the crash out. It's like a great gift. I double gold in one. Yeah, I don't double. I can't really double gold in one. Everywhere else. There's no problem with this now. Probably not going to do it. Take boats. I say, well, take boats. Yeah. Boats with your favorite. Oh, you mean what?
I mean, I don't I just put on a few things.
So if I could then, just the difference.
Yeah, Aruba.
Anything that's so good. I ain't giving you free carries.
That's good,
Taking vacation time, you know? But like paid time off.
Are you working towards
So my office
Okay, that's what it is.
It'll be online if you want it.
it's smart to just go to the office when it's so slow during that time.
Both I'm always a law.
Let's bring this on
It's been crazy, this can lead to come on full speed.
All big, I can almost answer that.
All right. So, been a handful of just, let's say random topics, but topics to get through, and then we'll be ready for our little quizzes. So, one of the things that typically local governments do is to set density for parcels of land. They may say you can build X number of square feet or X number of units per acre, or, you know, you can have potentially a site coverage ratio, a certain percent, or a certain floor area ratio, all these things that they, you know, in some cases almost seems arbitrary. But what do you think? Most of you, hopefully, you've taken the land use planning class, and my assumption is that your instructor of that class talked a little bit about density and talked about kind of maybe some of the rationales for why local governments might set different densities. Yes? No? Okay, so what are some of those rationales? Yep.
Traffic impact.
Okay, traffic impact. That if you have higher density than you would think, more traffic. Okay, would be the logical connection there. Okay, what else?
Infrastructure support.
Sorry, what?
It's just supporting infrastructure.
Okay, infrastructure capacity. Because you may have pre-existing infrastructure immediately adjacent to the site that you, if you have too high of a density, you got to go and replace all that infrastructure. And what we mean by that is that if you were thinking in a particular area, you were going to have low density in the sense of maybe huge lots with a single family home on them. You know, once again, maybe, you know, 4 units. And, you know, immediately adjacent to this site, you've got water lines, you've got sewer lines, you've also got, obviously, power lines, you know, that you've got to tap into for that development. And if at that lower density, it's going to be relatively maybe easy to tap into the pre-existing infrastructure in the sense that it was kind of built with that level of density in mind, okay? But if all of a sudden the local government says, woohoo, you know, we want to try to, you know, maximize our tax revenue, we want to try to increase the density, and we want to build, you know, literally, you know, many more units, to where instead of maybe 4 units there, allowing 100 or more. You know, and obviously, you know, in terms of height and bulk, you know, we're going to allow that many more units. But if they didn't really think about the infrastructure aspect of it, you build all those units, or you get in the process of building all those units, and then you realize, oops, we don't have enough water. Basically, the water lines aren't something big enough to support that many units. The sewer lines aren't big enough to support that many units. The power distribution lines aren't big enough to support, you know, that level of density. So now, as the local government, you've got to sort of step back and say, okay, who's going to pay for that extra sort of, you know, infrastructure cost? Are we going to make the developer pay for it? Are we going to pay for it because we want that extra density? And so, you know, those are issues that are going to have to be resolved. But that's part of the reason is that infrastructure capacity may be a limiting factor. And maybe for other reasons, we can't change that infrastructure. That it's just simply because of the way it's situated and located, the cost of replacing it or improving it, improving the capacity, is simply not possible. So we're limited maybe on what we can do. Okay.
So is that done based on zoning?
Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg sort of thing. Okay. You know, you could very well have, you know, obviously a new development coming to town, and you are saying, okay, if that brand new development all comes in, pretty much all comes in at once, or we know it's going to be phased in over time, then we go ahead and we put in those massive, you know, sewer lines and water lines and overcapacity for electricity service and also even in the road systems. You know, saying we need to have wide enough roads to be able to accommodate that amount of traffic. But, you know, if it's kind of like a very incremental, you know, sort of thing, then it may just sort of, you know, at some point pop up to us, oops, you know, we really don't have now all of a sudden the water pressure is not sufficient, the chute capacity is not sufficient, so, you know, have all kinds of problems there, and then the power outages as a result of not having enough, you know, distribution. So it's, your question is, well, is it a zoning thing? Well, the zoning may be, in some cases, done in parallel with that sort of land use planning piece of it. But it can also be that your zoning is set up to where it's not necessarily based on infrastructure capacity, it's based upon use, or it could be based on, form-based codes that, deal with more of the aesthetic qualities of, we really don't care what you build here, we don't care what the use is, as long as it looks this way and it's within character of the district. I mean, someone like yourself coming from, Savannah, one of the things in Savannah that you obviously see, with your alma mater, was that they came in, for people that aren't familiar with this, the sort of the founder of the Savannah School of Art and Design, in essence came in, bought a whole wide variety of properties throughout the area that had uses that had nothing to do with school, but then converted those uses into school properties, residence halls, dining halls, whatever, and a classic case of some of the best adaptive reuse probably anywhere. And so the point there is, there it was all about how does the property look and how does it function with respect to the use. But yet you have a lot of other areas where they're much more restrictive on those sorts of things and say, this was built as a house, it has to stay a house. It has to stay a single family residence. It can't be an office building. It can't be a classroom. It can't be anything other than a house. And so those are the kind of interesting sort of land use, sort of constraints that you may have, but maybe in some cases infrastructure dictated, because you think about converting a house that is a single family use into a commercial use that may be used as a classroom. Well, instantly you would say, I gotta have parking. Or I'm gonna have some other means to be able to get people in and out of that property on a regular consistent basis, so you have an issue there that you have to solve. But the point that I was initially just talking about was this whole aspect of how do local governments set the density requirements, and they set it pretty much based upon whatever maybe the existing or planned infrastructure capacity is going to be for that particular site. Would you have a follow-up question? Or?
Kind of. So I know that in Houston there's not really a lot of zoning laws. How do they handle all of that?
I hear that question quite often. And what happens in Houston? They've never had traditional zoning per se. What they have had are basically deed restrictions and private deed restrictions. Okay, so that if you built a property as a developer in Houston, then you would say, all right, future uses of this property are restricted to X, okay? And then over time, this whole kind of cobbled together sort of set of deed restrictions, this patchwork, that created all kinds of crazy messes for infrastructure capacity, because the exact thing that I was just sort of saying, that you could have a situation of where you had a single family home, and then literally across the street, you've got a 30, floor high rise, and that obviously needs a heck of a lot more infrastructure. So, Houston would then have to say, okay, well, we've got to figure out a way to put that infrastructure in, or potentially restrict the use of that property based upon the infrastructure capacity. But also, what is interesting about Houston is that the city itself will enforce private deed restrictions, because they want to ensure that certain things don't happen on those properties. So even though that maybe the owner of the property doesn't really care anymore, they do. And so they will come in some cases and be the enforcement mechanism of those private restrictions. And so over time, it's really kind of evolved to where, while there isn't zoning, there certainly are land use restrictions that are in play for these properties, okay?
Well, and it's something the local government's probably not gonna quote as a reason, but that factor has one of the greatest impacts on value, and therefore there's a ton of politics involved where those are placed.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing of density, it has a huge impact on the value of that land. How many units you can build on that land, what quality the units are, how tall they are, all of that really then feeds back into what is the underlying value of that land. I mean, the cheapest value of land is probably going to be agricultural use. But then you can also have a situation of where the city says, it's going to be parkland. You know, and so that parkland, you know, is not going to have any income associated with it. So you're sort of left holding the bag on that one. Okay, so the final sort of point with this density per acre thing, first of all, just to make sure that you all know this, how many square feet are in an acre of land? You should, everybody should know this. Okay, 43,560 square feet in an acre. Okay, you need to remember that. Okay, 43,560 square feet in an acre.
Quick
Yep.
comment, but when these parcels are being sold, you know, usually you're buying it subject to whatever what's there, but your terms and conditions a lot of times are, I'll close based on the fact that I can change it to what I want.
Yes, that you can have a change of zoning.
Right.
And so, as a developer, you spot a parcel of land that you think would be perfect for a particular use. But the current zoning on the land does not allow for your use. So you approach the property owner and you say, okay, I'll do an option contract, okay, with you on this property. And I'm going to do this option contract for maybe 6 months, 8 months, a year, whatever it takes for you as the owner of the property to go through, submit a zoning or a rezoning application, get the property rezoned to this use that you want. I will prepay you as the owner of the property. In other words, you as a developer will prepay the owner a certain fee, a certain dollar amount to be negotiated between the two of you as to, you know, what that, for holding the land for that period of time, but also achieving the rezoning. That you may even pay for the rezoning application, so forth. That's to be negotiated. But the idea is then, you know, he goes through that, all the brain damage associated with getting the property rezoned, and then once he's got it rezoned, then you're saying, okay, we predetermined a price, we'll close. Now, if he's not able to get it rezoned, then, you know, in essence, you may walk away with some fees that you had to pay to him to hold the land and go through that process. But, you know, it's also a question of how badly he wants to sell it and how good of a price that he thinks he's getting from you. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so in terms of this density, many times what the local government will say is you can have so many, like if it's residential, they'll say so many units per acre or so many square feet of developable, you know, land. So, okay, Aaron, you just give me one. Give me like a density per acre for some sort of residential.
Pardon?
Okay. For some particular type of residential use, give me a typical standard density per acre.
Standard density per acre? I mean, down here, they have
Just give me one example.
any kind of multi.
Oh, yeah, multifamily, like.
Eight units per acre.
Okay, so we say 8 units per acre. Keep it simple. All right. So 8 units per acre. All right. And I want to build, let's say, 500 units. Okay. Very simply put, how many acres of land do I need? 500 divided by 8 units per acre. So I would need like 62.5 acres of land, all right? Does that make sense? Okay, but that's the sort of thing that you're gonna be faced with is that, well, what happens if they allow me to increase my density from 8 units per acre to, let's say, 25 units per acre? Okay, that's like a 3-fold increase, all right? So if that occurs, so 500 divided by 25, now I only need 20 acres of land. That's going to be a substantially lower cost, hopefully, or you'd think, in terms of my land cost and the infrastructure I'd have to provide and so forth, so on, right?
Does it have to be like a homogeneous spread?
No. See, and that's the other piece. This is where then you get into the height restrictions. But, you know, it could very well be that they say, okay, maximum height is 4 stories, or maximum height is 2 stories, or maximum height is based upon some quirky formula, like, for example, you know, in flight paths of airports, okay, they will typically limit, you know, the height to some sort of pre-described formula for, you know, the landing patterns. You know, that as you're further away from the airport, you can build taller buildings. As you get closer to the airport, you can, you know, have to build much shorter buildings, okay? But you can also have some quirky ones as well, to where height restrictions are based upon landmarks. Like, for example, like in Denver, Colorado, one of the things that you can't do in Denver, Colorado is to block the view of the Rocky Mountains, okay? And so they have a certain height restriction that says, okay, no buildings can be above, you know, a certain height where that view is blocked. Same thing in Texas and Austin, Texas, you have what's called a capital view corridor, whereby that there are a whole number of points throughout the city that have been designated or pre-designated that you should be able to stand right here, look to the state capital of Texas, and be able to see it. And so you can never build a building in that path that goes above a certain height. So there are, you know, all kinds of quirky, strange restrictions as it relates to that, some of which have no rational rhyme or reason other than a local group of politicians said this is what we want to do. This is how we want it to look or feel or restrict or whatever it may be. Yeah.
So that's also really interesting too, because the impact fees, speaking of density, like the amount of money you pay for your application a lot of times does depend on the amount of land that you're submitting for. So that can also severely impact it.
Does it increase or decrease the more land you buy?
Well, it depends on the application. So in like,
Well, it depends on what your impact fee is covering.
right. Like
Okay.
I had the city asked us to like do underground utilities to pay for the improvements to do that for one project, for example. I mean, I have so many examples of things that the government asked us to do that was like ridiculous.
Yeah, see, no, but that actually brings up, it's a valid point.
Yeah.
The local governments, in many instances, have very little kind of, well, it's just like, to them, it's a simple statement. We would love to have underground utilities, okay? And, okay, so we're gonna do that. But then, what's the cost difference, you know, of having underground utilities? Specifically, we're talking about electricity, obviously. You're not gonna have above ground water and above ground sewer. That probably would not be a good idea. But, you know, but underground specifically, you know, electric lines and also, you know, for cable, TV, and you know, internet, that sort of thing. But the point being is, that's a cost, and it's a significant cost to put that underground. But a local government can just simply say, all utilities shall be underground throughout the entire city. Well, that obviously drives up the development cost. And so someone's got to pay not only for the on-site utilities, but in many cases, bringing those utilities from somewhere off-site to the site, okay? Well, who's going to pay for that? And that gets into this whole discussion of development impact fees, of who should be responsible for what. You know, should the developer be responsible for it? Should the end user be responsible for it? Should the local government be responsible for it? But somebody has to pay the bill. Okay?
So that's what the impact fees are kind of covering.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
Okay? As a general rule, the whole idea behind impact fees, let me just give you the classic example. All right.
And each agency has different impact fees as well.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
So let's take a city, we'll start, so we can break it up into a nice little tic-tac-toe grid, and let's just call this city San Antonio. All right? And there's a reason for this. So in the city of San Antonio, and I can't remember specifically how it was all, but let's say you've got the inner core here of the central business district, and then you've got all these other areas of town. Well, certain areas are more developed than others, okay, in terms of infrastructure. So let's just say that this area up here has no infrastructure whatsoever. In other words, there's no water, no sewer, no electric lines going up there. It's kind of raw, you know, land for all intents and purposes, okay? And maybe that's the same over here in this area. But every other area in the city, let's say, is already pretty much fully developed or pretty close to being fully developed. what they did was they said, okay, we've got this area over here, area X, that maybe is a blighted, deteriorating sort of area of town. And so what we're going to do, instead of charging you an impact fee, we're going to give you a rebate if you come in here, buy a property, redevelop, and ultimately make the area nice again, putting it simply, okay? But yet, in these areas, since these are in essence raw land and maybe environmentally sensitive areas and a handful of other things, we are going to charge you an outrageous fortune per lot for your development in those areas, because we really don't want to see them developed, okay? And we really don't want to have to spend the money to drag the infrastructure up to those areas. So we're going to try to make them as unattractive as possible, and as a matter of public policy, and drive the development or redevelopment of these areas that are already developed, okay? So this is where, once again, the local government gets involved.
So it's like steering.
It is, but it's steering the development to occur. It's not steering in the sense of we're steering, you know, like in the traditional kind of realtor sort of steering, but this is more in the sense of we're simply saying, we want you to focus all of the development activity, you know, in this area, otherwise you're going to pay a huge penalty for doing so. Okay, Brian?
My question, sorry, forgot it. I lost it.
Okay. Anybody else? Awesome.
I just want, so in areas like, let's say, land close to the railroad.
Right.
Would a city then lessen the impact fee because it's undesirable to be next to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, here's the thing, that the local government, for all intents and purposes, has more power than you can almost imagine over real estate values, okay? Sometimes they exercise it with absolute precision and accuracy, but then other times it's very inefficient, very lumpy, very kind of unorganized and unorthodox and laden with historical issues and whatever else. And so, but that's part of the value, to a certain extent, that you as a developer bring to the table, is hopefully understanding all of those dynamics to be able to maneuver your way through to get what you obviously want to build or redevelop done. But yeah, it's very possible that the local government will simply say, yeah, we've got a bunch of land immediately adjacent to the railroad tracks that we want to see it redeveloped. No one is stepping in to redo it, so we're going to basically give you a tax abatement, not charge you any city taxes on that property whatsoever for the next several years, because we simply want to see it redeveloped into something, you know, that's economically viable. And then they're going to collect the sales tax off of it, of whatever it goes in, if it's a commercial use, okay? Yep.
How do you foresee opportunity zones impacting like the local government then when that starts happening?
It's the sort of thing that, I mean, in what sort of impact? Are we talking about the economic impact, or are we talking, okay. So opportunity zones, part of what exists here is a way to, once again, encourage redevelopment in a particular, you know, geographic area that has been specifically identified and targeted, and you know, you get some income tax benefits off of developing within these areas. And so the idea is that through that redevelopment that occurs, that hopefully then the local government is going to pick up on the other side with the property tax, increase in the property tax values, increase in the sales taxes, increase in anything else that may, you know, take place there, you know, as a matter of the federal income taxes that may be waived or lessened for developing in one of these areas. Okay, so the point being is you can have the interplay of all different layers of government into these things, and it creates all sorts of weird, quirky, strange, but sometimes very lucrative opportunities, but usually there are strings attached to them, you know.
They don't always agree.
And they don't always agree. I mean, one of the very first projects that I did, I had the local government, you know, say, oh, we'll give you, you know, a $100,000 facade grant, you know, for your property. I'm like, wow, that sounds like a great idea. You know, so I go through this whole procedure of applying for this, and they said, well, if you get this, it's gotta be a certain color, it's gotta be a certain style, it's gotta be a certain, you know, type of finish, it's gotta be this, that, and the other thing. And it was gonna cost me, you know, twice as much as what, you know, the grant would be. And I was like, there's no economic value in this for me. You know, I mean, it sounds great up front, but, you know, we begin to run the numbers, you're just like, this doesn't make any sense. So, you know, you just sort of like, okay, walk away from that, you know. But not every situation's like that. You know, in some cases, you know, they'll give you that money with no strings attached, but usually they're almost always for strings attached to it. Okay, moving forward, go ahead.
One last question on impact fees. If, like, say if the point of the impact fee is to cover the cost of, say, connecting the utilities and all that stuff, if you have a strategic advantage.
And roads.
And roads. So, like, let's say you have a strategic advantage where you have construction experience and can do it for a cheaper and much lesser price than the city can. Is it unheard of to negotiate that impact?
Not at all. I mean, because if you've got the technical expertise to be able to put in your own water, sewer lines, and they're simply going to be inspected by, you know, whoever to ensure that they meet the certain threshold requirements. But yeah, that's very doable.
Okay.
Or at least in most jurisdictions, it's doable. Okay. Okay. Other questions before we sort of move forward?
I don't have a question, but I've got one. When we were in Fort Myers, if we put infrastructure in that was over and above, we would get impact fee credits that we could sell to other developers, and it increased the amount of development happening in Lee County. So I sold like $1 million worth of impact fees, which was crazy, but it was we bought them with a piece of property, and we never developed the property. We sold it, we kept the impact fees, and then I sold those. It was pretty lucrative.
Nice. Well, actually, one of our professors owns some undeveloped lake lots up, you know, north of here, and I can't remember the name of the lake. But anyway, the point being is, he actually developed all the water and sewer capacity for the properties, and so now he has a basically kind of his own little utility district of sorts that he is able to then charge whoever develops the property a fee and get a recurring income off of that. So it's kind of, you know, you get into
Like a
infrastructure business.
CDD,
Yeah.
like a CDD.
Right. Okay. Moving forward. All right. Let's make sure we get back here to what we're doing. All right. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some issues related to build-to-suit properties. Okay, what is a build-to-suit? Yeah, you have a client that needs very specific thing built, okay? Once again, you know, could be, whether it's a shopping center, could be a corporate campus, could be a church, could be, it doesn't really matter. The point being is they need something specific built, and you work with them to get that specific thing built, all right? So how does that then differ versus speculative construction?
You have a guaranteed tenant.
I'm sorry?
You have a guaranteed user.
Yeah, here you've got a guaranteed tenant. Here, it's sort of the whole build they will come, okay, kind of attitude. And, you know, with the speculative construction, you know, you don't know, in some cases, how long you may have to wait to get that tenant, you know, once, you know, you may be halfway through the construction process and you get lucky, you get a tenant, fills up the property, you're happy, you move on. Could also be the case, you build it, you get it ready for occupancy, you sit, you wait some more, you wait some more, no one's calling you, and you know, then you get stuck in a situation of you've got all these holding costs that you may have to incur, you know, during that wait period. Okay, at least one that sort of, and I don't know what the situation is because I haven't really checked into it, but you know, where you guys did your, or some of you did the project this past semester down there on the corner of whatever it is, Nova and College. You know, that has been cleared off now, whether any of you have seen that. It looks like that somebody's beginning to do something there, but across the street, as you kind of continue down, I guess, College, There's a massive warehouse that's been built there, brand new construction. They've had release signs on it for forever, and I was passing by it last night. All the lights are on inside. Nothing is in there. It's a massive warehouse. And, I'm just saying to myself, okay, if it's not pre-leased, they're sitting on, this space that has now been finished, and, how long are they gonna sit there, before that actually gets occupied? And it's a hold, that they've gotta, because while it's just sitting there, they're still having to pay property taxes. They're still having to pay utilities. They're still having to pay, maintenance and the upkeep, to keep the grass mowed and the, everything, in working order. And so you've got some real issues, with that whole idea of sort of speculative construction of how long do you really have to wait in some cases before you actually get a tenant. I mean, the perfect solution is, yeah, you get the build-to-suit tenant and you build for them, everything's done, very clean. But the point is that usually, if you go into this with a build-to-suit, you probably are not going to get as high of a rate of return as you are predicting that you're going to get with the speculative construction, okay? I'm very careful about the way I worded that, because, even though you have higher expectations for how this speculative construction is going to turn out in terms of the rents that you're going to get and the occupancies and that sort of thing, it may never materialize, okay? Whereas taking sort of, the bird in hand in terms of, okay, we've got a build-to-suit tenant, they're ready to move in and ready to occupy the space immediately upon finishing the construction process. Yeah, you may not walk his way with as much, but it certainly pays the bills. Okay, question?
Speculative construction, aren't you supposed to do it only based on good market analysis?
Yes, but markets change, especially over a construction period.
Like,
if you've been building this thing for 18 months.
Yes, 2 years, usually, so 2 years.
Yeah, then all of a sudden, what has happened in that 2 years? A lot. Okay, and so I mean, the properties that have come online maybe within the past 6 months may do reasonably well. But imagine those properties are going to come online maybe a year from now or 2 years from now, whenever interest rates are going to probably continue to go up. There's going to be, I'm suspecting, some major issues. Okay?
Build to suit, let's say something happened again, the market, the person doesn't want it, so I guess the person is stuck with it?
Well, normally you're gonna have an arrangement that's pretty much going to say, we are building this for you. You are committing to purchase this immediately upon.
Regardless of.
Yeah, but usually there are going to be then specific damages that you would be able to pursue them in the event that they back out of the deal.
Yeah.
Okay, sort of liquidated damages or specific performance or something. Okay. And then once again, that gets into more of a real estate law kind of question. Okay.
So is this binary for all kinds of developments?
But it's like either or, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I mean, you could have components that are built, like for example, you build a property, it's a multi-tenanted property, this portion is build-to-suit, and the remainder is speculative. Okay?
So you may use a build or build the same thing.
Well, it could be, once again, this is a grocery store that you're building to suit, and these are inline tenants on either side of the grocery store that you really have no idea who those are going to be until maybe the project is built. I mean, you might know, but in some instances, you're just you're hoping that you can open up the grocery store and show such demand that you can maybe negotiate higher lease prices for those, sort of ancillary satellite tenants. Okay?
Is that the case where the NSU schools, the old school similar is like further down University? I know there's a hospital being built there, so is that a build-to-suit scenario?
Yes, for the most part. I mean, there are portions of it that are going to be sort of speculative. The shopping center that's to the south of campus, the university owns it. The university is going to have part of the medical school, teaching hospital there. They're going to have apparently apartments built there. They're going to have some retail, other office space built there. It's going to be a massive multi-use sort of facility. But yeah, it's going to take over. I think it's going to be President Hanbury is called, I guess, an academical village, and hopefully, it's, you're really supposed to, as I said, kind of focus on this medical component to it, healthcare related. Okay, all right, moving forward. So, let's say that we've got a couple of different scenarios here. And scenario A versus scenario B. Scenario A, well actually let's not do it that way, let's do it this way. Scenario A, we're going to build, and then we're going to get, let's say, $20,000 a year in rental income. And this is going to be for our build-to-suit tenant. Whereas over here on our spec space, it's going to be something like this. It's going to, in other words, it's going to sit empty for an entire year, okay, before somebody takes occupancy and occupies it. So what I'm going to be looking for as the developer of this property is, all right, how much is this present value of lease payments worth to me today, discounted at some sort of predetermined rate? So give me a rate.
6.5%.
6.5%. All right, so we put in all of these as cash flows. One payment per year. Put in 6.5% interest, and then solve for our net present value. Okay, so let's see what we get. Okay. So the net present value of that $83,113.59. Okay, everybody good with that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So now we've got to sort of wonder over here. We can kind of look at this a couple different ways. We can sort of say, well, how much more would we have to charge these guys in order to get the same thing here? Or we could also look at it as, you know, how much of a discount might we give these guys relative to these guys? So you can kind of approach it a couple of different ways, all right? So if we're looking at it, you know, from the standpoint to basically make ourselves whole with this side, then we're going to want the net present value over here to be the same as this. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this is one way we can work it, okay? So what we could do is, let's see, we could kind of come in and, let's just say we put the 20,000 in, just for fun, just to see what this does to us. All right, put these in as cash flows. All right, use the same discount rate, in this case 6.5%. Or we can kind of make the argument we could use a different one, but at the moment we're going to assume the same. Solve for net present value. So what we're saying, just make sure that just the initial sort of way of looking at this, is we're saying that for the build-to-suit, the present value of the cash flows from the build-to-suit of getting immediate occupancy for 5 years, the 6.5% discount rate, the value of that to us as the developer would be $83,000. Does that make sense? Okay. On the other side, the speculative development, where we have to wait 1 full year of vacancy before we get an occupant, and in this case, assuming they're paying the same amount as the build-to-suit of $20,000, using that same discount rate of 6.5%, their net present value is going to be $64,000. Okay, everybody with me?
Who's the they?
I'm sorry.
Who's the they?
They-
Tenant is a they?
The owner.
Okay. In both instances, these are cash flows that we are receiving as the owner of the property. So the tenant, whoever the tenant is paying us these cash flows. But in this circumstance, it's a build-to-suit tenant that we have already pre-negotiated with, whereas over here, this is a speculative tenant. We don't even know who they are, potentially, because they're not going to really identify themselves for a whole year. Okay? All right, so now, if that's the case, we can play around with this, you know, in several ways. We could sort of say, all right, how much more might we, you know, charge the tenant here in order to make it equal to this, okay? Or we could flip it around and say, if we're happy with this over here, we could say, how much of a discount could we give these guys to be equal to this? Does that make sense? So it's a question of kind of what it is we want to achieve, okay? So let's just say, in this particular instance, we're happy with the $64,000 net present value, and so we're wanting to know how much of a discount we might be able to offer the build-to-suit tenant. All right? So what we could do, very simply, is to come in, put the $64,000 as our present value, 10% as our interest rate for 5 years of steady income. What would then be the payment?
I don't follow over with 10%.
Oh, I'm sorry. 6.5%. Okay. So, sorry.
Like, wow, this is cool.
The quiz is 10%. So you've already got the C part of the answer. Okay, my bad. Sort of me thinking about other things instead of thinking about what I should be thinking about. Okay. Okay, present value, 6.5%, 5 years, and payment. So 15,481.04. So what this would represent, in essence, so instead of them paying $20,000 a year of lease payments, they could pay only $15,481 instead, and that would be equivalent in present day dollars to getting the $20,000 for 4 years. Does that make sense?
One more time.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're saying, everybody understands the setup. Here we have a build-to-suit tenant, and we're saying they are willing potentially to pay the $20,000 a year for the next 5 years. We're discounting that. We're getting $83,000 as our present value. Okay. Then we're going over and we're saying, okay, we could get a speculative tenant that comes in a year from now, they would pay $20,000 a year, discount it back, be worth $64,000. Now what we're saying is, if we would actually be happy with this sort of present value, the $64,000, then how much of a discount, or what would be the adjusted amount that we would charge these guys to give us the equivalent return? So all we're doing is we're saying, we're taking the $64,000 as our present value, the 6.5% interest rate for 5 years, since we would be receiving the payment for a full 5 years. What would that be worth to us that we could actually have them pay? So instead of paying the $20,000, they could pay only $15,481 each of these years, and that would be equivalent to this. Okay, does that make sense? All right. This is all about applying the logic. Okay, yep.
So how would you apply it the other way?
Okay, so
Would you switch it from 5N to 4N?
yeah, but then you've got a little bit of an issue here because you've got to deal with the zero for that first cash flow. So what you would have to do is find the present value at the end of year 1 and then discount it back, all of it back at 1 year.
So you couldn't just take the 83,000 that you got from the BTS and do the same formula?
No, because you've got the missing amount here.
So just go to 4 years, vice.
You can't. You can only, okay, this year here is the problem, okay? Because you've got to account for that.
Yeah.
Now, one way you could, we'll do it, okay? One way you could account for it is to say, okay, let's take 20,000 as the payment for 4 years instead of 5 at 6.5%. Solve for present value. Now, let me also just sort of draw this on a timeline here for a second. Okay, so what we're going to be solving for is what is the present value here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, not the present value here with this. Okay, so we do that. We get 68,515.97. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put that, we're going to sort of now ignore all of that. We're going to put the 68, because it's the lump sum, 515.97 as the cash flow occurring here, and then now solve for the present value. Okay, we have to make it a lump sum in order to come back to the present. So we take the 68, 515.97, make that future value for 1 year at 6.5%, and then solve for present value.
Seems like a lot of extra work.
Yeah. My question was, how would you make?
So you end up with 83,113.59.
So what does that tell me though? Is that telling me that
Well, you're using the same interest rate, and that is a lump sum amount. Where if we're making the assumption Well, here, we're making the assumption that we're gonna be able to potentially invest that money and earn 6.5% for that first year. And if you're not, you're really saying that the equivalent value is this because that's the amount that you would be receiving, and you're sort of saying that it would be worth, actually, no, wait a second, that should be worth less.
Yeah, it should be discounted.
Hold on, wait a second, what happened?
Just do it over 1.065, it'll do one period.
15, 97, future value. Yeah, how is that? Okay, 64, 334, 24, my bad. Okay, so that would now be the present value that you would then compare to this here, okay? And so what you, in essence, could do is then put that in as your present value for 5 years.
Wait,
Yeah, but then for now for 5 years, to spread it out at the 6.5% to find out what the equivalent payment would be.
If it's 15.4, you want to reduce
Yep.
it for it.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. Okay.
Yeah,
That was so simple.
Okay. All right. Now, if you don't have available your spreadsheet on the construction draws, let's assume that we have monthly draws of a fixed amount of what? Give me a dollar amount. That's too much. Let's make it
$5,000.
Oh, 7,000.
Let's do 7,500. Okay, so 7,500 monthly draws for 12 months. How much do you owe the lender at the end of the 12 months, assuming what interest rate?
10.
10% interest rate. Okay, so what you're gonna do, you're gonna have 12 payments per year. 7,500 is going to be the amount that you're gonna withdraw. So that's gonna be your payment. 12 in, not 12 shift in, because we're only dealing with 12 months at a 10% interest rate accumulation. So you're gonna be solving for what amount are you gonna be due and payable at the end of that period. $94,241.76.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just for fun, $7,500 a month times 12 months would be $90,000. So the difference between those two would be the interest. Okay. Make sense? Okay. Okay. Holdbacks. Anybody have any idea what a holdback is from the perspective of a lender on a loan, land development loan?
That they give you a partial part of it and then they pull back some of it.
No, not necessarily. I'm sorry? Well, okay, holdback provisions, I mean, it could be, once again, yeah, they are withholding certain funds, or it could be holding certain portions of the land for development, okay? So you could have a situation of where a lender, if you're doing a subdivision, I'm horrible drawing cul-de-sacs, but anyway, assume got lots here. All right, so we got lot A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, okay? I would have never had a career as an artist, okay? All right, so we've got this sort of a dynamic. Now, one can make all sorts of arguments. I don't want to get too deep into this, but you can say, well, okay, which of the lots are more valuable, okay? And everybody has a little bit of a different opinion. Some people will say the lots that are at the end of the cul-de-sac are the most valuable, okay, because they're more secluded, you know, less traffic, you know, more quiet enjoyment, that sort of thing. But then, you know, other people might say, well, maybe these, you know, up here at the beginning of the street are more valuable because they're corner lots and this and that and the other things. So you can make some arguments. But then, you know, you might say, well, then the lesser value lots are maybe these kind of here in the middle. Okay, we can, like I said, we can make all kinds of arguments all day long. But what you might have happen is you have release provisions and sort of holdbacks that a lender realizes that there is different value for each of these, and so may not allow you an equal dollar amount sort of release for these properties. Like, for example,
This is if you're developing the whole section?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to throw some numbers out here. I don't know if any of these are realistic, but we're just going to throw them out. Okay, 125, let's say. Okay, now the total value of this okay, everything combined, if I did my math right, 950,000, okay, is the value for all that land, yes? And so let's say that we have managed somehow to get a land loan from a lender for this subdivision that we're going to develop, and we would start selling off these lots, okay? And the problem that sometimes happens is you sell off the premium ones first. And the lender has to be careful as to that they don't get left holding a worthless piece of land, okay? And so they're going to have probably very specific sort of release provisions as to when or what the dollar amount is that they are going to allow each parcel to be released. So while the overall value might be 950,000, and that would mean 950,000 divided by, there's what, 8 lots? Yeah. Would mean the average price per lot would be 118,750 bucks. Okay? So, the issue is the lender doesn't going to want to get stuck with potentially, if this is the true market value, what we've sort of shown here on the outer perimeter, but yet the overall amount was 950, then if you were to come in and you were to do a sale, and you were to sell A and H, but yet you were only able to get $100,000 for them, okay, instead of getting the full 150, the lender would not allow you to basically sort of release the liens on those because it wasn't a sufficient dollar amount to justify the overall value in relative terms. Does that make sense? I'm sorry?
So then their loan amount is based on that?
The loan amount is based on the 950.
Okay. So
Okay.
if you undersell it, they're not gonna
they're not gonna be happy. And so they have to be careful whenever setting up sort of the release provisions for the parcels to ensure that they're getting, obviously on average, the 118,000, regardless of what you end up selling them for. They've got to obviously average that, because they don't want to end up in a situation of where everything gets sold at below whatever the face value is, and then they're left, let's say, with, I don't know, lot C, after having sold everything, and now you've got to sell lot C at $400,000 in order for the lender to recover their full 950.
So then they're not gonna release the lien.
Right, they're not going to release a lien unless they reach a certain threshold per parcel.
So every parcel has to go for 118,750 minimum.
Minimum, but yet they're still probably going to identify what, the lender is still probably going to identify what the individual parcel value is. I'm kind of oversimplifying it, because if you think about it, once again, you've got a large scale, land development where you've got hundreds and hundreds of parcels. This begins to be much more of an issue, that you don't want the developer to simply sell all of the cheap stuff, as quickly as possible to try to, or not cheap stuff, but try to sell off all the good product at cheap prices. Okay.
I think if they end up selling like the premium lots at higher than expected prices, then they have the flexibility basically they can absorb, or the bank still probably wouldn't let them.
It just depends on what specifically, what the arrangement is the developer makes with the bank. But for the most part, all of this really comes back to, what is it going to take? What are the release provisions going to be for the lender to release the liens off of the individual parcels? Okay.
They look at them like that individual.
Well, yes, I mean, you're going to make the assumption that it has been subdivided, okay? That you may have bought it as one big parcel of land for, 950, and you have subdivided it into these 8 different parcels. And so the lender's just making sure that they're getting back an appropriate dollar amount for each of those parcels within that subdivided development. So the only thing that the lender is concerned about is making sure that they are getting an adequate value to cover the loan that was obtained in the property. Therefore, the release provision is simply to release the lien that the lender has against the property so that it can be sold.
And when you buy property like that, that comes with that kind of stipulation, you accept that because it gives you a lower interest rate, or that may be the only way to get the loan?
Well, it's the only way you're probably going to get the loan. You're going to have a scheduled release or some sort of predetermined dollar amount that is going to be associated with each of those parcels. Okay? Okay. We talked for a few seconds earlier, but I'm going to expand our chat on option contracts. Whenever you go to, in many cases, develop some sort of large-scale development, I mean, think about all the kinds of large-scale developments that are out there. You've got everything from airports to shopping malls to corporate campuses, whatever. And in a lot of cases, there's not necessarily going to be one singular owner of land that you're going to have to deal with to do whatever it is that you need to do. And so you're going to need to do large-scale land assembly. Now sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes that large-scale land assembly, you do get it all from one owner. You get it from a farmer, you get it from a rancher, you get it from somebody that just happened to own the property for many, many years, and you're able to get the whole thing all in one fell swoop. No harm, no foul, everybody's happy, okay? But, as I said, especially in more urban areas, you're probably going to be dealing with multiple property owners, okay, to get all the land that you need for this development. So what you may have happen, you've got all these different property owners. So we've got, once again, property A, B, C, D, E, and F. You need all 6 of those parcels in order to do your shopping mall, to do your corporate campus, whatever the use is. You need all 6 of those parcels to make it work. If you don't get all 6 parcels, it won't work. Okay? Everybody follow? All right? So let's just say under ordinary circumstances, you go to parcel owner A. You talk to them, woohoo, no problem whatsoever. You're able to buy the parcel at what you want to buy it for. You give them $100,000, you buy the property, you're done. Okay? You go to parcel owner B, same thing, obviously bigger parcel, you give them, you know, $300,000, let's say, for their parcel. Keep going, you're on a roll, give parcel owner C $200,000. Come down here to D, give them $100,000 for their parcel. You sort of skip over E, and you go to F, and you pay them $100,000. And your expectation is that you want to buy E for $100,000. But when you get to E, you deal with one of these sort of holdout situations of where we don't want to sell. Okay? 1.2. We don't want to sell under any circumstances whatsoever. We got a great story to tell you about this. So, but they don't want to sell. You've already acquired, you've already purchased everything else. You really need their parcel to complete the project, all right? And, but you've already paid up front for all of these. So you're now stuck with those other 5 parcels. You're not able to do your development. You're unhappy. They're wanting a mountain of money, okay? And so you're screwed, okay? But if you had kind of gone into this with basically option contracts, where that you would say, okay, I want to buy your property, property A, but it's contingent, you know, on a whole number of things, but we're going to set the price today. The price is going to be $100,000, and but I'm going to give you maybe $5,000 for an option contract to hold that property for 6 months. Okay? Same thing over here. Maybe give them more because obviously bigger property. Here, you know, 10,000. Here, 5,000. Here, 5,000. All right, so you're only out of pocket now, basically, the cost of each of these option contracts. So whenever you get down to E, in the event you can't get the deal done, you're only going to be out of pocket the cost of those option contracts. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. But, you know, that doesn't preclude E from still holding out on you, but at least you're not going to have as much invested in the deal as you would have had. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but you wouldn't have had as much in the deal had you went ahead and purchased all the parcels up front and then end up with the holdout, you know, there at the very end. Yep.
Well, and the other reason you'd implement that as a developer is that's not recorded. So,
right.
So if E is
right. So this is, you're typically going to put, you know, sort of non-disclosure agreements with each of these parcel owners, you know, so if they don't go talking to their neighbors and saying, hey, Mr. Developer, Mr. Developer came to me and just offered me $100,000 for my property, and, you know, so that everybody gets all, you know, juiced up on the whole idea of they're going to somehow become a multimillionaire, okay? Which obviously happens quite often. And what happens in practice in many cases, especially with these sort of larger scale land assemblies, is that whoever's doing the assembly, they will hire, in many cases, different firms to represent them, secretively represent them. So you're broker number 1, broker number 2, broker number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. All of you are representing me, but you don't know that you're representing me, other than, you know, it's through some other sort of you know, kind of not really clandestine, but certainly not known sort of entity. You're going to each of these property owners and they're asking, well, who's the buyer? I don't know, you know, it's basically I'm doing this on behalf of somebody, and it will be and even when you're doing the option contract, it'll be some sort of shadow entity that, you know, has no connection to anyone or anything specifically, and then what will happen at the time of closing is then you'll close all of them simultaneously, and then all of a sudden you find out, oh, it was the city of Miami, or it was the, you know, this particular major developer, you know, whoever it might be, okay? Make sense? Okay. I think it's kind of a cool story. In Arlington, Texas, several years ago, they were building a regional shopping mall, the parks of Arlington, and they had a situation kind of like this. They had a holdout, and it was a retired couple. They were like, you know, 85, 90 years old, had lived there, you know, for like 50, 60 years, and so basically they came to them and said, we want to buy your property. They said, no, we don't want to sell. You know, we're going to stay here basically until we die, you know, boom, end of discussion. So they came back, you know, a couple of times, you know, kept upping the price, and then eventually, which I thought was just classic, so the developer was so desperate to buy this, came in literally with an armored truck, and they start unloading bags of money onto the front porch of the house, and just start stacking them up, you know, hundreds of thousands of, you know, it was several, actually ended up being like $2 or $3 million. I mean, it was a substantial amount of money at the time. And, you know, and the couple still said, no. Well, and this is where the sad part of the story sort of comes in. So shortly after that, one of the couple died. And their daughter, who happened to, you know, be aware of what was going on here, had the other one declared mentally insane and moved off the property, and then ultimately, you know, sold the property, took the money, and ran. So, yeah. Anyway, happens all the time. You know, but I mean, it was. But actually, in this particular case, what was sort of interesting, what the developer actually did, because he couldn't get the sale to occur whenever he actually needed it, was for a couple of years, literally built this massive hedge around the property to sort of landscape around it so that you wouldn't necessarily see this little tiny farmhouse, you know, with, you know, all this development, you know, sort of occurring around it. But it was a fascinating, you know, story of once again, these sort of large-scale land assemblies gone wrong. You know?
Right now in Daytona Beach, imagine that this is a real deal parcel, same exact location as a miniature, you know, boutique hotel that's been there for, it's like an 8-unit hotel, right on the beach. Like the back of the 300 and 100 is the ocean. And they would not sell. And now there is the largest project being built around them, and they've lost their ocean view.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're literally building it all the way around them. It's kind of.
There's all sorts of strange stuff that, you know, obviously that happens like this, but just, you know, sort of be aware. But the whole point of the large-scale land assembly and using the option contracts is this way to certainly kind of reduce the risk on the part of the developer to be able to acquire the property. Okay? Yep. Maybe you want to do.
This can be really lucrative when prices are escalating, you know, over a long period of time, because you're getting options on today's prices.
Right.
So 3 years from now, prices could have gone up 300%.
Yeah,
and you've got an option to buy at a discount.
But the option contracts expire.
Well, you can pay an extension.
Yeah, and so, but most of the time, most of these option contracts, you know, I mean, you can do it as long as you want, but most of them are going to be like a 6-month sort of option contract, you know, with potentially an option to extend, but not always, you know, because sometimes the seller doesn't want to get locked into, you know, and being stuck with the situation of where
trying to have my property.
Right, trying to have the property for an extended period of time. But the point well taken that if you can get, you know, a situation of where, let's say that I'm the property owner and you come to me and you tell me, you know, you'll give me $1 million for my property, and I'm thinking my property is only worth, you know, a couple $100,000. And I'm thinking, wow, that's an incredible deal. And then you say, okay, but I want, you know, a 3-year option contract. And I'm going to say, well, is it worth that? Maybe, you know, what the heck? No one else is knocking on my door. Maybe I will accept, you know, that option contract for that period, if in the eventuality that I could get, you know, the $1 million or whatever. So, okay. So once again, these are used predominantly whenever you've got multiple owners, obviously, of properties to be able to have to negotiate with. Okay, moving forward. Yep. Okay.
When you're looking at a property like that, don't you survey the owners or whatever to see who might be a holdout before you even?
Yeah, I mean, if you can determine that, but you know, sometimes it's not as easy as you might think. Because it's a sort of thing that somebody may not know what they have, you know, until it's really, you know, because you hear all these, you know, speculative, you know, things. I mean, one of the best ones was one of the examples I was thinking about in Fort Worth, Texas, when they built the Alliance Airport, you know, north of the city. Well, once again, they were buying, the Perot family, Ross Perot family, you know, were buying up these massive, you know, parcels of farms and ranches and, you know, a whole number of properties up there, but they were buying, you know, this property in the name of a whole variety of other people while they were trying to assemble the land. And, you know, it's really just one of the few ways that you can kind of achieve it.
Walt Disney World was a good
Well, yeah.
You know, took years to assemble.
And then, but once, yeah, somebody realizes that, ooh, it's this, you know, then all of a sudden the dollar signs in their eyes start to light up, I mean, I even had one of those situations happen to me. I mean, I had a property that I owned and that I had up for sale. And, you know, I bought it for like $60,000, a commercial building. I bought it for like $60,000, had it for sale for like 250 grand. And no one had come along, you know, wanting to buy the property. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I get this call and from this agent I out of town, never heard of, and I'm like, "Want to make a full price offer? Sounds good to me," you know. And you know, once again, it was up for sale. I mean, I was just like, okay. But I like tried to investigate, trying to find out, you know, anything about this potential, you know, brokerage firm. And like I said, it was an out of town office. I didn't really think a whole lot about it. You know, I just didn't. And I was happy to get a full price offer. Well. We go to closing and everything is said and done, and then it was the city government that was trying to buy it. And I'm like, I could have probably got, you know, another $200,000 or $300,000 for that property, but I, you know, I mean, it's still okay.
What's too late?
Well, I'm sorry?
What's too late because you have the closing people.
Yeah, you know, but it was just like one of those things, you know, just sometimes it happens. But, you know, you don't necessarily know. That's my point. You know, they don't want to disclose that because the moment they do, then you are going to do that. You're going to raise the price. You know? Okay.
When you get the offer, don't you think a contract with some sort of name?
That's what I'm saying.
Like
It's a fictitious name.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's not even real.
And then it's like the mailing address though, that they.
Yeah, and then they provide like some PO box or whatever. You know, it's just like there's not like an easy way. Trust me, I'm a pretty resourceful guy, and I was just like trying to find out who is this person, and then I found out just like, well, it's, you know, they're willing. As I said, they were willing to pay full price. I'd had the property on the market for several months. I was just like, sure, why not? You know,
you bought it for 60,000.
What? Yeah.
I mean, you make money, so.
No, I made money. That's not the point. It's just like more. Okay. Moving on. All right. So we got a couple of other little calculation-y thingies. Let's see. All right. So let's say that we've got a property, and the minimum rent that we need to support that property is how many dollars per square foot per year?
$20.
20? $20 per square foot. All right, and let's assume that.
Is this release schedule?
I'm sorry?
Is this a release schedule?
No. No, this is basically we already talked about release schedule. Project feasibility. All right, so let's just say that it's $20 per square foot is the minimum rent needed to be financially feasible. Assume that the market rent is, let's say, $15,000 annually, or I'm sorry, no, per month. Per month is the market rent. And it's 10,000 square feet. So if we need $20 per square foot per year, minimum rent, and the market rent is $15,000 per month for this space, is this project going to be feasible for us?
No.
Okay, I hear some yeses and I hear some no's, so let's just sort of see. So what we need to do is convert one of these into the other. So in the case of $20 per square foot, that times 10,000 square feet, that's going to be what?
20,000.
Oh, well, 200,000 I think is overall. Hold on, sure, do this up. 20,000. Yeah, 10,000 times $20 a square foot. Yeah, 200,000.
Oh, you're doing it per year.
Yep. That's per year. Divided by 12 months. Would be $16,667 per month. Okay, so if that is the case, this is the rent needed. And then this is the market rent. So the market rent is the one we can actually get, okay? Whereas the rent needed is what we need in order for the project to be feasible. So what we're saying is that we can only get $15,000 a month, but we actually need $16,000 a month for it to be feasible, then this is not feasible. That's all we're saying. Simple. Okay? All right, project internal rate of return. So how much do we buy a property for? Give me a dollar amount.
500,000.
500,000. Okay, how much are we going to sell it for?
2.5.
How much?
$2.5 million.
Oh, let's not get crazy. Let's say that we're gonna sell it for $750. So we buy it for this. Oops. We sell it for this, but every month we get some cash flow off of it. So let's just say, how much cash flow do we want to get every month?
12,000.
Okay, 12,000 a month rental or lease, triple net. Okay, now, what's the project internal rate of return? Assuming a 5-year hold.
What the 5 is, should be the number, huh?
Well, you can do
No,
it either way.
5 years. Yes, let's make all kinds of mistakes today.
5 number.
You can do it either way. Because
Five
it's
should be in.
constant. It's got a constant cash flow. Plus we're gonna do it. It's easier to do that.
32.85%. Okay? Three got? Nope, hold on.
That's what I got.
14.8.
Hold on, put it in again.
I got that too.
What?
We're all over the place.
I guess.
I'm getting 32.85.
Yeah.
I'm holding firm with that.
Okay.
Now, there is another way to do this, and that would be, once again, you set it up 12 payments per year,
Cash flow.
and you do it as a cash flow.
That's what I do.
So you do 500,000 as your initial cash flow. Then you put in 12,000 as a cash flow, and you put that for 59 months, the 59 shift in sub J, and then the final cash flow would be the 750,000 plus 12,000 equal.
Shouldn't it be four shift, EJ?
No, it's for 5 years, 59 months out of 60.
But if, what about if you did doing it 144,000
I
a
know
year?
where I should put.
You
No,
follow
I
my-
subtracted the 500 from the
Sorry?
250.
What about if you do it per annual, the 144 in cash flow?
Why would you do that?
Because if you're calculating 12,000 times 12, if that's what you're getting.
Well, technically it's more, if you've got a monthly income number,
Okay.
it's more accurate to assume that it's being collected every month, and therefore it's gonna be a little bit different, but it's not gonna be drastically
No,
different.
I got 33 point.
Yeah, it's gonna be pretty darn close.
Okay, so technically it is right.
It's right, but it's simply you're calculating on an annualized basis, but
Do it monthly if it has the monthly.
correct.
Got it.
But because it's real estate, we're not supposed to do it.
Well, no, you make the assumption that the payment's occurring at the end of the period. End of the period is in the month.
Okay, so if it's like, so if you're in like an accounting mindset, then that's when you go just randomly recognizing it all at the end.
Right.
But if it's like actuality.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Good? Almost there.
Here's the last part.
The IRR.
No, you don't, okay, this one you don't have to do. This is just simply if you want to use the cash flow function instead of using just the interest rate.
Yeah.
So here, you're saying putting in the initial 500,000 as a negative cash outflow, $12,000 a month for 59 months, and then the 60th month is gonna be the 750,000 plus 12,000 to get the final cash flow and then solve for internal rate of return, and you should get the same answer, the 32.85. Perfect. Okay? All right. Okay. This is a project net present value. So let's say that we've got an annual net operating income of how much? Give me an amount. How much?
100,000.
100,000. Yeah. Okay, $100,000. All right. And let's say that, okay, once again, that's an annual $100,000. And it's going to sell at a cap rate at some point in the future.
Is this net present value?
This is, yeah, projected net, or project net present value. Okay, so the cap rate, what cap rate do we want it to sell at?
7.
Okay, I heard 7. 7%. Okay, so that means it would sell at, or a value of $1,428,571.43. Okay. All right. Now. How much would this be worth to you today if you apply a 9% discount rate 5 years? So what is present value at 9% for 5-year hold. Okay? What are you gonna do? Okay, so, first of all, since this is given to us on an annual basis, all right, so we know the future value is going to be the 14,28,571.43. It's what we're going to sell it for. We know we're holding it for 5 years. And we know the discount rate we're going to apply is 9%. So what other piece of information do we have?
The NOI.
The NOI. So the NOI, okay. That's what we're going to be solving for. Present value. $1,317,438.54. Okay?
Is there a plus or minus? That should be one.
No, I mean, it is, well, I mean, that's, from your perspective, you are buying it now, so you're spending the 1,317,000 today in order to get the cash inflows of the 100,000 and the 1.4 million. So yes, the present value is a negative number.
It's not because it's the money you're receiving, right? The 100,000 is not a negative because it's the money you're
Yeah,
receiving.
this is, okay. Cash outflow is 1.3 million. Cash inflow, 100,000 and 1.4 million, because those are both income to you once you bought the property. Okay, final piece and then quiz time. So what if the rent or the income were to go down by 10%? What impact would that have? Okay, so that means that basically the rent maybe goes down by 10%. So let's just say it goes down to 90,000. What impact might that have? What do you get?
1.2.
Okay. So it's just a simple way to kind of see what the sensitivity would be of rents going down on the property, okay? But you also might want to do more than just adjust the rent going down by $10,000. What also is probably going to happen is the future value is going to go down as well, because if the future value is based off of your net present value, or your, I'm sorry, it's based off of your income. So if the income goes down to 90,000, okay, so now, put that amount in.
As your future value?
As our future value, and then resolve for the present value. now you end up with 1,185,694, 695 rounded.
Is the step with the, not with the payment to get the present value, is that necessary?
No.
You're just showing us.
Just showing us kind of intermediary.
Okay, so,
Okay.
I think it's a matter of practice, though. If people actually.
So would you want us to use then, here where you have 90,000 payment, it's
Right.
giving you the present value of 1.2.
Right.
You calculated for that 90,000, or would you want us then in the question that you're asking us calculate for the future value?
That is, it sort of depends what I'm asking.
Gotcha.
Before you close that, for the release schedule, you said you talked about refresh.
Well, a release schedule is simply the lender needing a specific dollar amount in order to release the liens on the property.
So that's really like the, because you mentioned that as a holdback.
I'm sorry?
As a holdback.
Okay, holdback is also from the lender's perspective, it's simply where the lender may be holding back either funds or holding back property from being developed. It's a-
And the release is just on the money.
Right.
so remember when you went through the whole,
Darryl?
So we're using our computers for the test?
You can use computers for the whole thing. Okay, Mr.